Chronic disease occurs when you lose the ability to make nitric oxide. We need to be active because exercise stimulates nitric oxide production. So products that contain L-arginine or L-citrulline basically are useless in terms of promoting nitric oxide production. And in the US, it's probably globally now, 50% of the men over the age of 40 self-report erectile dysfunction. Drugs like metformin, all these anti-diabetic medications are really ineffective at managing blood sugar because you need nitric oxide in order for these drugs to work.
Entrepreneur, inventor, and nitric oxide scientist. Our guest today on the Settle or Be Better podcast is Dr. Nathan Bryan, who's going to be talking to us about longevity, biohacking, and all things nitric oxide. So, welcome, Dr. Nathan, and over to you. Why don't you begin by telling us a little bit about your personal health and well-being story and your current work?
Well, great. Thank you, Sakshi, for the kind invitation. It's an honor to be with you. But yeah, I've been in nitric oxide science and medicine for the past, almost 25 years now. I started, back in the late 90s, early 2000s when a Nobel Prize had just been awarded for the discovery of nitric oxide. And, it was an exciting time. And so we knew nitric oxide was extremely important, but we really didn't understand all the biochemistry and physiology of nitric oxide, of how does the human body make it? Why do some people lose the ability to make nitric oxide? And then perhaps most importantly, we really didn't know how to restore and replenish nitric oxide production safely and effectively in humans. So that was the basis for my research program now for the past 20 years. And I'm happy to report we've made a lot of discoveries. We understand how the human body makes nitric oxide. We understand what goes wrong in people that can't make it. And now we have technology that can actually restore and replenish nitric oxide production safely and effectively in humans.
Got it. Thank you so much for sharing that. And, although you've been in the industry for 25 years and doing this work, it's almost the first time for me, someone talking about nitric oxide in so much detail, right? I've been speaking to so many speakers in the biohacking world, but not many of them have ever mentioned this. And this is fairly new for us in India as well to know about, right? So we are really excited to know more and dive deep into it. So to begin with, for our audience to understand and to simplify it, what is nitric oxide and why does our body require it?
Yeah. I think you make a very good point because, we've been doing this for a long time. This molecule was discovered 40 years ago, but still there's very little awareness globally around nitric oxide. And so that's kind of why what you do is so important, because it allows us to educate and communicate the importance of this to your community, to the community really worldwide. But to answer your question, the nitric oxide is a signaling molecule. In fact, it's a gas. It's one of the few gases that's produced in the body that actually signals. But it's responsible for many biological functions. It's mainly recognized as a vasodilator, meaning that it's produced in the lining of the blood vessel and it dilates the blood vessels. So now you can open up the blood vessels, you can get more oxygen, more nutrients delivered to every cell in the body. It's a potent anti-inflammatory. We know that most chronic diseases have an inflammatory component. Nitric oxide is a potent anti-inflammatory. It's a neurotransmitter, so it's how cells in the brain communicate. It allows us to recall memory, to develop memory, and all aspects of cognition. And it's an important molecule produced by our immune system. In fact, it's how we combat invading pathogens from viruses, things like the coronavirus or respiratory viruses, and even bacterial infections. So when our immune system gets this response that we have an infection, then it mobilizes, we generate a lot of nitric oxide, and it kills the bacteria and shuts down virus from replicating. So at the end of the day, it's a signaling molecule. And when we lose the ability of cells in the body to communicate, then bad things happen. And in fact, now we know that the loss of nitric oxide is responsible for the onset and progression of most, if not all, chronic diseases. So it's a critically important molecule, and your body cannot and will not heal unless you restore the production of this single molecule nitric oxide.
Got it. And like you mentioned, what makes us lose nitric oxide in our body? What are we doing wrongly that is leading to a loss of nitric oxide?
Well, there are a number of things. In fact, it seems that most, especially in the Western world, the Western diet, the Western hygienic practices, really everything we do in Western industrialized nations seem to lead to a lack of nitric oxide production. So we'll take those step by one. So number one, a sedentary lifestyle. We need to be active because exercise stimulates nitric oxide production. When we're not active, it's kind of this concept you use it or lose it, right? So we lose the activation of nitric oxide. The other is a Western diet, a high carbohydrate meal with a lot of processed foods, simple carbohydrates. That leads to a loss of nitric oxide production. And then there are things like pharmacotherapy, drugs like proton pump inhibitors and antacids shut down nitric oxide production. Antibiotics, antiseptic mouthwash. Now we understand that the microbiome, the bacteria that live in and on our body, are responsible for producing nitric oxide to the host, for the human. So when we overuse antibiotics, when we use things like an antiseptic mouthwash, which 2 out of 3 Americans use an antiseptic mouthwash every day. Fluoride is another problem. Fluoride's a neurotoxin. It's an antiseptic. And I'm not sure how it is in India, but in the US, most municipal water supplies have fluoride in them to kill the bacteria. So when we drink the fluorinated water or we cook our food in the fluorinated water, it kills the oral microbiome. And then there's 200 million prescriptions written every year in the US alone for antibiotics. So now we know that, all these things combined, and even cholesterol lowering medications, these statin drugs inhibit nitric oxide production. So in most of these people, at least in the US, and I think it's probably growing worldwide, that the number of people that are on these different classes of medications, whether it's antacids, antibiotics, cholesterol lowering medication, all of this seems to disrupt nitric oxide production. So now we understand mechanistically how the body produces nitric oxide. There's a growing understanding of what we're doing to disrupt nitric oxide production. So now it's very simple. The solution is very simple. Let's stop doing the things that disrupt nitric oxide production, and then let's start doing the things that promote it. And now we understand that actually the human body can heal itself if we just practice these very simple concepts.
Absolutely. That was really well explained, and that really simplifies it down for us. And, like you mentioned, the multiple things we're exposed to that leads to the loss of nitric oxide, like the water or the products like mouthwash. Can supplementing with nitric oxide supplements help, cover this up and also to, fulfill the losses that we are having with nitric oxide?
Well, the simple answer is yes, but the truthful answer is most supplements do nothing. This has been a major problem in the science world for the past 25 years, because once the Nobel Prize was awarded and nitric oxide kind of hit the radar, there were a number of companies that launched nitric oxide supplements or products. And today, now that we have a firm understanding on the science and biochemistry of nitric oxide, we understand that most of these products on the market don't do anything in terms of restoring nitric oxide production. So products that contain L-arginine or L-citrulline basically are useless in terms of promoting nitric oxide production. I'm not sure how it is in India, but in the US, the past 15 years, there's been an explosion in, beetroot product, beetroot extracts, especially in the athletic world and sports performance. Unfortunately, most of the beetroot products don't contain any nitric oxide activity. So there's no benefit to nitric oxide by most of these beetroot products. So what we have to rely on is the science. Most of these companies out there selling nitric oxide products really have no understanding of nitric oxide. They're just throwing some ingredients together, calling it nitric oxide product, when it really mechanistically and biochemically cannot and will not produce nitric oxide. Now, what we've done is a little bit different. I've spent the past 25 years really in the trenches and in the basic sciences, understanding how the body makes nitric oxide and what goes wrong in people that can't make it. So we make a line of products that actually generate nitric oxide gas. So our whole concept was, if your body can't make nitric oxide, then we got to do it for you. So similar, if your body is not producing enough hormones, whether it's thyroid hormone or testosterone or estrogen, what do? You have to give those molecules back. So what we do is, if your body can't make nitric oxide, then we actually develop products that produce it for you. The challenge, and the reason why other companies haven't been able to do this, is because nitric oxide is a gas. And once it's produced, it's gone in less than a second. So I was the first and still the only person on the planet who's ever made a solid dose form of a bioactive gas. So our whole concept was, when you take our products, we generate nitric oxide gas. But we go a step further. We actually improve the ability of the body's ability to make nitric oxide. We restore the function of the enzyme, and we restore the oral microbiome. So the beauty of our product technology is, again, if your body can't make nitric oxide, we do it for you. but we actually fix the reason your body can't make it. So now, as you take this product technology, you improve the body's ability to make nitric oxide on its own.
Understood. And just to sum it up for our audience, can you tell us, like, 3 to 5 pointers that our buyers should keep in mind when they are buying, when they're purchasing nitric oxide supplements? Like, what are some things that they should be mindful about and check before they buy any nitric oxide supplement?
Yeah, well, I think you have to do the research on the company. Is the company that's selling these products, have they ever published a paper in the scientific literature? Do they have a bona fide nitric oxide scientist on staff or part of the company? Number two, are there any clinical data published on that particular product technology? Because the metric in, at least in drug discovery, which I'm trained as a drug discovery chemist, is you have to demonstrate safety. Number one, that's all. Supplements just have to be safe. You don't have to prove efficacy. But we go a step beyond that. So not only have we proved that our product technology is safe, but we can actually see this in randomized placebo-controlled clinical trials and see the effects. Most companies out there will never put their product through a randomized placebo-controlled clinical trial because, number one, it's very expensive, and number two, most supplements will never move the needle on a well-designed clinical trial. So companies aren't going to spend the money to get a negative result. And this is the gamesmanship that many companies play out there. And so look for products that have a strong basic science component behind them. Has the developer ever published in the nitric oxide literature? Are there clinical trials? And then do you see the results? So when you take this product, do you actually see a reduction in blood pressure? Do you see an improvement in sports performance? Do you see changes in aesthetics or whatever endpoint you're looking at? And those are our metrics. And really, we're the only company out there that plays by those metrics. All other companies are really just pretenders that take advantage of the consumer and in most cases are deceptive and fraudulent in their advertising.
True, that's very true, and that does help our listeners to keep these pointers in their mind while purchasing. Because when it comes to biohacking and supplementing, and people who are all into it, they're reading all the books of the father of biohacking, and everybody they're researching, they're watching podcasts like this, and they are the first ones to jump on any supplements that have been mentioned because those seem to be one of the most easiest things to do if they have the money to put in it, right? So they jump
Yeah.
onto it, and whatever is the first thing that comes up on their Google search is what they end up buying. So this really does help to sort of segregate the best quality when they're buying it, right? So thank you for sharing that with us. And also, like you mentioned about beets, I want to know what is all the buzz about beets. Like, does it mean that we should be consuming beets, like natural beets, on a regular basis? Does it mean we should go for the product like yours, like super beets? And what is it exactly?
Yeah, so let me just address the comment you made. Biohackers are extremely important because they're the early adopters. They're the first people that when something new comes on, they're the first people to adopt this new concept and the first people to actually buy the products. And the problem with the algorithms of search engines, it's the companies that pay the most money that are on the first page. And what I'm finding is the people that spend the most money are the people who typically produce the least efficacious product. So they have to spend the money to be on first page because they know their product doesn't work.
True.
So and that's a problem. It's just a problem with the algorithms of Google and other search engines. So sometimes you have to dig a little bit deeper. Um, but in terms of beets, there's a number of published clinical trials on the effects of beets. So beets, number one, have to have a certain amount of nitrate and nitrite in them in order for the body to metabolize those naturally occurring molecules into nitric oxide. And as I mentioned, I've tested almost every beet product on the market. 99% of the beets out there don't do anything in terms of nitric oxide. The other problem is that this molecule that's found in most beet products called nitrate is inert in humans, meaning humans can't metabolize this enzyme. So that means we're dependent upon the microbiome. So if you don't have the right oral microbiome, then these people get zero benefit from beets. And so now this is a major problem. And it's not just the US, it's worldwide. Because there's dysbiosis in the majority of people around the globe. In America, it's due to antiseptic mouthwash, antibiotics. 2 out of 3 Americans use antiseptic mouthwash every day. So what does that mean? If you're taking a beet product that has nitrate in it, then 2 out of 3 people won't get a nitric oxide benefit from that beet. The other problem, and we published on this in 2015, is that the nitrate content of beets varies depending upon how the beets are grown, where they're grown, how they're harvested, the time of harvest, the soil conditions. So there's a wide variability in the nitrate content or the nitric oxide activity of beets. So there's no way to predict, if you just go to the grocery store and buy beets or eat beets, if that's going to be sufficient to allow your body to produce enough nitric oxide to see a physiological benefit. So the difference in what we do is that we actually, number one, we start with a superior seed. So we put it and grow it in normalized soil conditions. We optimize the soil, make sure the soil has all the nutrients, macronutrients, micronutrients it needs, enough nitrogen in there to where our beets assimilate a lot of the nitrate and other nutrients. And then we ferment our beets. We convert the nitrate to nitrite. So now we're not dependent upon the oral microbiome. So we do it for you. So again, if your body can't do this, if you don't have the right oral microbiome, then we've pre-converted these beets into a source that the body can actually utilize to make nitric oxide. And I think it's very important. You brought up super beets. Super beets is, my original product, but super beets now there's a lot of confusion because now that company is selling a super beet products that doesn't contain super beets. And again, this goes back to what I think is the dishonesty by a lot of these companies, and it's basically fooling customers into buying that product when there's a lot of super beet products out there that aren't super beets. In fact, they're dead beets. So what I've done now is I've created a new product called NO beets, where we've taken this process. The consumer can be confident that everything that we do now generates nitric oxide. And the super beet brand used to do it, the super beet brand today does not do it. So again, there's confusion in the marketplace. It's not right, but it's just the way of the world sometimes. So now any product that we bring to market, you can be confident that it generates nitric oxide. We've done the pre-conversion for you. So again, our products aren't dependent upon the microbiome. They're not dependent upon stomach acid production. If your body can't make nitric oxide, we do it for you. That's the difference.
Got it. And the transparency and honesty just makes our audience and anybody who's purchasing even more confident on the money that they're spending, right? And the product that they'll be receiving. So thank you for sharing that with us. And and also the details would be in the description below for the website and for the products. If our audience would like to reach out, they can definitely find it in the description below. They can reach out to you and try the products out there for themselves. So they can definitely look out for that. And moving on to my next question is talking about chronic diseases. What is the connection between nitric oxide and chronic diseases?
Well, we've really made a lot of progress in our understanding over the past probably 20 years. So we look globally, and I think the important kind of perspective and paradigm that we've operated on in the past 20 years is let's take important clinical observations and then work backwards. So when we look at chronic disease, there are four common denominators of all chronic disease. There's low blood flow to the affected organ. So whether it's heart disease, neurological disease, kidney disease, lung disease, there's four things that always occur: low blood flow, inflammation, oxidative stress, and immune dysfunction. So those four components show up in every single chronic disease. So then we have to understand what causes those four responses, and then how do we mitigate those? So what we're finding is nitric oxide controls and regulates all four. Chronic disease occurs when you lose the ability to make nitric oxide. So then that causes a decrease in blood flow to the organ. It causes inflammation, causes immune dysfunction and oxidative stress. Now, when we give nitric oxide or restore the production of nitric oxide, we can actually start perfusing and improve the blood flow and circulation to that organ. We downregulate the inflammation. In fact, a number of my patents are on a method of reducing inflammation. We shut down the oxidative stress, and we prevent the immune dysfunction that occurs in that organ. So now nitric oxide is really considered the holy grail in chronic disease because it affects all four hallmarks of chronic disease. And we know mechanistically exactly how nitric oxide is doing it. We know how much nitric oxide is necessary to achieve all four of those. And now the most important thing is not only can we kind of reverse chronic disease, but I think if we get this information in the hands of people like we're doing today with your biohacking community, now people can take steps to prevent the onset and progression of chronic disease, because prevention is much simpler and much cheaper than treatment. So we have to be proactive instead of reactive.
True, and it's quite surprising for me as well to just know so much about nitric oxide today and how closely related it is to like inflammation and chronic diseases, because the awareness around this, like you said, is not that great currently. So it's really surprising to come across this being such a crucial factor and not many people talking about it. So it's really amazing to know more about this today. And people with what particular health conditions should definitely consider supplementing with nitric oxide, because probably not all your doctors would even tell you to go for some other supplements apart from your regular medication, right? They would just
Correct.
prescribe what they usually do, and they wouldn't want their patients to go out of the way or to suggest more things also. So what people with what particular health conditions should definitely go for nitric oxide that would really help them in their health?
Yep. Now, look, we understand that the clinical consequences of insufficient nitric oxide production. And there's a growing list. But let's just take the top chief complaints. So, number one, if you have an unsafe elevation in blood pressure, if your blood pressure is above 130 over 80, then that's a nitric oxide problem, because we have to normalize your blood pressure. In fact, any 1 millimeter increase in blood pressure above 120 over 80 is increasing your risk of heart disease by 1%. So if you've got a blood pressure, systolic pressure of 130, you've increased your risk of heart disease by 10%. If it's 140, it's 20%. So we have to normal. In fact, blood pressure is the number one risk factor for the number one killer of men and women worldwide, which is cardiovascular disease. So maintenance of blood pressure is absolutely essential. Number two, it's sexual dysfunction. Because we need to dilate the blood vessels of the sex organs in order to get proper function. If you can't make nitric oxide, you can't dilate the blood vessels of the sex organs, and both men and women develop sexual dysfunction or erectile dysfunction. And in the US, it's probably globally now, 50% of the men over the age of 40 self-report erectile dysfunction. So that's billions of people out there that have a loss of regulation of blood flow due to a loss of nitric oxide production. Those are the top two. And then, the others are things like if you tire easily, walking up a flight of steps, if you develop exercise intolerance, if you can't go out and do a 20, 30-minute walk without getting short of breath, that's a nitric oxide problem. If you start to developing loss of memory or mild cognitive disorders, you can't remember where you left your keys or things like that, then that's a loss of regulation of blood flow to the brain due to a loss of nitric oxide production. And then the others are metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance diabetes. We need nitric oxide for insulin signaling to regulate glucose uptake. So if you're insulin resistant type 2 diabetes, that's a nitric oxide problem. And so the list goes on. But I think if we can just address those 4 or 5, that's billions of people that can reverse their health conditions simply by considering nitric oxide and trying to restore their nitric oxide problem.
True, and this does help because one of the most, highly occurring disease in India is type 2 diabetes. Like every family would have at least two members in their family, like who have type 2 diabetes, and it's something that they haven't dealt with, and they're just living with type 2 diabetes year in and out on medication, off medication, and haven't dealt with it, right? So this does help, and I hope our listeners go out there and do more of their own research, and not just rely on just one episode for this, but like you said, learn more about the companies and when they go for the purchases. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And you did answer it a little bit in this segment, but what is the connection between nitric oxide and brain health?
Nitric oxide and brain health.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think let me just go back, because I think you mentioned type 2 diabetes, and it's the frustrating thing for me as a scientist is that type 2 diabetes is completely preventable and, more importantly, completely reversible. So number one, it's not going to be due to drugs like metformin. All these anti-diabetic medications are really ineffective at managing blood sugar, because you need nitric oxide in order for these drugs to work. But it's really diet and lifestyle, and it's patient compliance. So if you're developing type 2 diabetes, you got to stop doing what you were doing that developed that. You're going to have to change your diet, change your lifestyle. And most people don't. They want to take a pill and not change their diet and lifestyle. And that doesn't work. So I just encourage you to, take action, change your diet, change the conditions that led to the development of type 2 diabetes, introduce nitric oxide, and then we know scientifically and clinically that it's completely reversible and preventable. So that's one. Number two, in terms of brain health, the brain's primary energy source is from sugar or glucose. So now we know that Alzheimer's is considered, diabetes type 3. So again, going back to what we discussed earlier, there's decreased blood flow to the brain. This has been documented in imaging like SPECT scans and functional MRIs in patients with Alzheimer's. So there's a shrinkage of the brain and there's a loss of blood flow. So what's the connection? Number one, you develop the metabolic phenotype of Alzheimer's or neurocognitive disorders because, again, nitric oxide is required for glucose uptake. The brain primarily uses glucose as an energy source. So if you can't make nitric oxide, the brain can't take up glucose and develop metabolic phenotype. Number two, nitric oxide is what controls and regulates blood flow to the brain. If you can't get blood flow to specific regions of the brain, then that part of the brain cannot work. And if your body can't make nitric oxide, if the arteries in your brain can't make nitric oxide to increase blood flow, for example, to the prefrontal cortex for memory recall, then you can't recall memory and you develop neurological disease. So nitric oxide corrects the metabolic phenotype of Alzheimer's and neurocognitive disorders, and it restores blood flow to all parts of the brain. So it really gets to the root cause of most neurocognitive disorders.
Got it, understood. That really does simplify brain health and nitric oxide connection for us. Thank you for sharing that. And lastly, you talk about how uh, the how nitric oxide is like the foundation of biohacking, right? Because when we say biohacking, like there are just millions of things that come to our mind, and like the bigger things like let's do cold plunges, let's do sauna, and let's buy all of these supplements. How is it that nitric oxide is the foundation of it? And also to sum up the whole episode today, of course there's supplementing, but what other things should we definitely start doing in order to boost the nitric oxide production in our body?
Yep. Now, the beauty of biohacking is it introduces kind of an acute stress response, right? And we call this hormesis. So you're subjecting your body to kind of an acute trauma so that your body adapts and becomes better adapted to dealing with that stress or trauma. So your body always adapts. But the adaptive effects of everything we're doing is dependent upon the ability to regulate blood flow and change metabolism. So for instance, if you're using an infrared sauna, uh, it's doing two things. You're getting light therapy to activate the mitochondria to improve energy production. You can liberate nitric oxide at certain wavelengths of light. But if your body can't make nitric oxide, there's less nitric oxide to be released by infrared light therapy. You have to recouple the mitochondria. Without making nitric oxide, the mitochondria become uncoupled. So you can activate or stimulate the mitochondria all day, but if they're not recoupled due to a lack of nitric oxide, then you're not going to get the benefits of increased energy production. So nitric oxide is foundational in the fact that, number one, we're going to increase the amount of photolabile stores of nitric oxide that can be activated by light. We're going to recouple the electron transport chain of the mitochondria. So now these biohacks, whether it's infrared sauna, whether it's cold plunging, improvement in the regulation of blood flow, nitric oxide is going to make all that better. If you're using a hyperbaric chamber, the mechanism of hyperbaric oxygen is the release of nitric oxide or the production of nitric oxide, the release of stem cells that then repair and replace tissue. But if your body can't produce nitric oxide, again, hyperbaric oxygen is going to have limited clinical utility. If you take our nitric oxide before a hyperbaric, you're going to improve the clinical response to hyperbaric oxygen. Whether you're doing grounding or a carnivore diet or a balanced diet in moderation, again, all of that's dependent upon the body's ability to produce nitric oxide. So what I'd like to say is, any biohacking strategy or modality has to start with nitric oxide. It's not the only thing you should be doing. It's not a silver bullet, but it's foundational and allows the body to respond better to any other biohack you may be practicing.
Understood. Thank you so much for sharing that. And this brings us to the end of the episode today. And as we conclude the episode, do you have any last messages or thoughts to leave us with?
I just think that people need to do their own research and really get the information and don't believe the ads on TV. Don't believe the companies that are spending the most on advertising. Look for people who've been, the companies that I own and operate, I'm the scientist. I'm the one responsible for the research and the innovation, the discoveries. And so we only bring products to market that are clinically validated, that are based on real science, not on deceptive marketing, not on who can spend the most money. And so I encourage people to do the research, understand the importance of nitric oxide, and then start introducing these simple, biohacks that can improve nitric oxide production. Um, I think I encourage people I send people first to my educational website. It's drnathansbryan.com. I do a monthly blog. We've got some videos on there. I have my own YouTube channel. You can go, and we do a lot of cool and fun testing and analytics of competitive products, and just giving people basic information they need to really take charge of their own health and life and prevent getting sick. Because I think what we're proving today is that if you get sick, it's very difficult to get well. The current medical system doesn't make anybody better. So our approach is to be proactive instead of reactive. Take the steps today while we're young and healthy to prevent getting sick when we're older.
Absolutely. That's a lovely message. And also, anyone who follows you on Instagram, it's really interesting to watch you test out the products for us. It's like having the best science class that we never had as a kid. Having it as an adult, it's really interesting to learn that way and to see the reality, right? So, thank you for sharing that with us. And all your links will be in the description below. People can reach out or to your YouTube channel, to your blog, and learn more about it and probably, try out the products themselves. So, thank you so much for being here today. We're really grateful to have you. And I hope that this begins the spread and the awareness of nitric oxide and the importance of it in our lives. Thank you so much once again for being here.
Thank you very much. It's been a great honor and pleasure being with you.
That's it for today's episode. I am Sakshi Pawar, and I'll be your host for the Settle or Be Better podcast. So stay tuned while we bring more inspiring stories your way. You know the drill. Subscribe to the Settle or Be Better podcast, like, share, and comment on our videos, and hit the bell icon, because you don't want to miss the mind-boggling health discussions we're about to bring for you. Why settle when you can be better?